Motorola type system. And you can roam over, and if you program the radios properly, they'll actually be able to operate on that said system. So from a competitive procurement standpoint, I guess your question is there an advantage to brand X over brand Y, Motorola versus somebody else? It really depends on the system itself and what it will actually do. From a P25 standpoint, we're going to require that as part of the requirements. From a coverage and a design standpoint, brand X may be able to do it with X amount of sites. Motorola may be able to do it with a certain amount of sites. And there are different stages, specifically with regard to the 700 megahertz on their design for their amplifiers. Motorola and Harris are actually further ahead than some of the other vendors. One of the other considerations you want to include in the system is a path to P25 phase 2, which is 6 1/4 channel spacing, because you don't want to be doing this all over again in 5 years. Right.
And here's my question, because standards are something that I have to deal with in other things.
Sure.
So what is the order of succession for standards? Where are we at now? What is the next, and what is the final? And what are the time frames between those?
With regard to the standards themselves?
Let's say P25 is the end game, which is what it sounds like from you, that's where everybody needs to be.
Sure.
And we are currently at 700 megahertz?
You're currently on VHF. All right, let's separate it, because P25 and narrowbanding are two slightly different things.
Right.
Narrowbanding, the first phase, is 12.5 kilohertz. So your equipment can make the bridge and the jump to 12.5 kilohertz. Your equipment cannot make the jump to the next phase, which is 6 1/4. P25 phase 1, from a standards level, is already mature and out on the market. P25 phase 2 is about to be formalized and released. It has gone through the entire process from a standards position to become the next formalized standard. What does it give you? P25 deals with interoperability, not channel spacing.
Right.
So P25 phase 2 closes the window in terms of having to purchase equipment from a specific vendor. What P25 phase 1 versus phase 2 does is it allows interoperable communications between two different dispatch centers. Currently, okay, the two dispatch centers on a phase 1, P25 phase 1 system will not necessarily talk to another dispatch vendor's equipment.
Okay.
Okay. Phase 2 remedies some of those shortcomings, which specifically had to do with dispatch and some of the other features on the radios themselves. Over-the-air reprogramming, where you can actually, from a main computer, force out new programming through the radio, yeah, and it not be dependent on, I have a Motorola system and I have a Motorola radio. I need both for that to work. Phase 2 remedies some of the communication gaps between it to create a seamless standard. That's what phase 2 does. The equipment capability to go to 6 1/4, which is sometimes called phase 2, but not P25, speaks to the ability for the equipment to go from 12.5 kilohertz spacing, or narrowband, to 6 1/4 kilohertz spacing, which is the next step that the FCC will be moving to. That equipment exists today because 700 megahertz does have a date for 6 1/4, and that's January 1st of 2017. All 700 megahertz equipment must be at 6 1/4. So the new repeaters from Motorola, Harris, Tate, and all your vendors, the latest equipment that's out, the new GTRs that are replacing your Quantars, which are going out of production, will migrate and move and accommodate 6 1/4 channel spacing. And it's in the county's best interest to buy equipment that will do that and implement it that way, rather than in 5 years come back to the table and have to do something to your system again.
And that's why I'm looking at these standards. Okay, so 2017 is 6 1/4.
For 700 megahertz.
For 700 megahertz.
There is no date defined yet for UHF, VHF. The 2013 date is the only actual mandate that has been identified by the FCC for 12.5 kilohertz spacing. The ultimate plan and where they're going with it has been very clear. They've identified that's where they're going. I would suspect that the date for that, or the new mandate for 6 1/4 for UHF and VHF, will come out sometime after 2013, when they will actually require it as a mandate.
I'm just trying to get standards in place to make a decision, because as
Right.
you're showing us that there are some steps. Is there any, do you see any mandate coming for P25 Phase 1 or Phase 2? Is there some
The only real,
target date that somebody's
I
looking
don't see an FCC requirement for P25 Phase 1 or Phase 2. However, P25 is required for grant funding. So it's somewhat of an unwritten mandate.
Well,
if you want
it's a
access to
partially
grant
funded
funds,
mandate?
you need it.
What
Right.
kind of grant funding are you seeing for a P25 system? 10%, 20%?
It really depends on the grant opportunity itself. Some of it is matching funds. Some of it is with regard to the infrastructure cost piece of it. Some of it may be with regard to the actual radios themselves. And they're all over the map. So it really depends. I can't give you a 10%.
Have you done one that's gotten a grant?
Say again?
Have you done a locality that's gotten a grant?
Personally, myself, Cortland County has received some partial grants. I was involved with some of the statewide system for BTOP, which is the broadband granting opportunities for Iowa State. They've received some. I don't know the exact dollar amount. That's a statewide system, though.
But nobody's received like 20% of their local cost that you know of to do this?
Specifically that I'm aware of, no.
Because when you say grant to me, I mean, if somebody gives you, you know, $5,000 or even $500,000 in a $12 million system.
I understand that, yeah.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I think that's it for now.
Yeah, I do have a couple of questions.
Sure.
You indicated about regional partnerships.
Yes.
The localities around us that we would possibly be able to partnership with, how far are they along in the process? And are they possibilities, true possibilities, other than just, hey, you can partnership if you can find somebody to partnership with?
It depends on where they are in the process. Hanover County's got a system in place. They may be interested in partnering. It's a Motorola system. King William has their RFP on the street, should get responses back. EADS has stopped and spoken to them with regard to a regional system with King and Queen. EADS and Tate actually worked together on some responses. The King and Queen system, which has just been implemented and turned up, is a Tate system. And the intent is, if they create a regional system, would be to put EADS infrastructure over top of it and trunk the entire system. One of the other things I think I should bring up too, with regard to regional partnerships, you're not specifically mandated or required to stay in the same band as your regional partner. So with regard to the Cortland County example, which I brought up, the partnership that they're actually entertaining, which is a shared master site for a Motorola system. Tompkins County, their neighbor to the west, is an 800 megahertz Motorola system, trunk system. Cortland County is implementing a UHF trunk system. They're going to share the same core controller equipment, which is residing in Tompkins County, but they're going to have their own cell or individual system operating in UHF. So there are some advantages. There are some disadvantages to that as well when you get into the negotiations and governance and how do you actually share maintenance costs. If you're in different bands and one band requires a software upgrade, who pays for it? If you're in UHF and they're in 800 and the mandate dictates that they be 6 1/4, but you don't have the mandate yet, you have to work out an agreement ahead of time, or you're going to be fighting that issue at a later date. So all those things need to be looked at. But from a regional standpoint, to answer your question, it's a little bit all over the map. There are some that are installed, there are some in the process, some that are just recently installed, and then, as yourself, about to possibly go out to RFP. And there's a couple of counties in the area in that same step.
Okay. I have two more questions. You may want to be just a little less in detail.
Sure.
The second question has to do with the vendor. You indicated vendors may build the towers and then lease back to the county.
Yes.
For usage.
Yes.
At what point do we start that process, looking at that, after we've determined where the towers are going to be, or do we look at other towers that are already in existence to see if we line up with those towers that we can use? Because there are some towers on the western side of the county and throughout the county
Right.
that I believe there's space on.
Yes.
And so at what point do we start looking at that? Does the RFP cover those type of things as well?
It does cover those things. Where you would start in that process would be later in the process. You put your RFP out in the street to determine what is the optimal location for the sites. And what we're going to provide in the RFP is a list of, first, existing towers located within the county. There's a lot of advantage to that. The tower exists, you may only need a shelter, and from an implementation standpoint, and with the time frame for 2013, you can get that site on the air fairly quickly. You don't only require that they use existing sites, though, because there are instances where if you install a 250-foot tower or some height tower, you eliminate 2 towers. And you eliminate all the equipment associated with those 2 sites, and you also reduce your maintenance costs overall for the entire system. Obviously, fewer sites requires less maintenance costs for the overall lifespan of the system. It's at that phase, once you have a design from one of the vendors, that you start looking and negotiating specifically with tower construction companies that would consider building towers. And ultimately, the question should be, what's in it for them?
Right.
What they're looking to do is build a tower. They know they have at least one tenant on it, the county. They minimize their risk because normally there's a number of ways to structure it, but one way is if they don't lease any cellular carriers on that tower, the county can buy that at cost. It minimized their risk in putting a tower up and not being able to put keep it on their books. From your perspective, you did not lay the funds to build it originally. You can slowly allocate money to it. And depending on how you negotiate the lease, if they get 5, 6 cellular carriers, which is completely possible with new LTE coming out and the broadband that the cellular carriers need to do,
Right. Okay.
you can defray it.
You probably answered my question.
And then some, probably. Sorry.
The other question has to do with the towers that, even if the county built the towers.
Yes.
And I'm assuming the $13 million figure that is thrown up, that is shown up here, includes the county building the towers. All the towers.
No, it does not.
18 million.
No.
18 million was all the towers?
No, actually, on both the 12.1 and the 18.4, we actually only included building half towers. Because there are quite a few, as you said, there are quite a few existing towers with space on them around the county that present a real possibility for the county to use. So we included half, basically to come up with a budgetary figure, we included half of the total in terms of new towers. In all of the figures, we obviously replaced the Bowling Green Tower, which is a county tower.
The broadband is a big issue in Caroline County, especially in the outlying areas of Caroline County. The western side of the county
Sure.
basically has nothing.
Right.
Is this something that we could use in order to enhance the tower? But I mean, we could use the tower. We have someone else coming in to get on our tower that could provide broadband to the western side of the county.
You could. And
Okay,
the radio? Well, let me say one thing.
If we go further with it, then we'll have a further explanation. That's good. We can do it. I guess my question to the attorney is, and I have one other question. My question
Sure.
to the attorney is, I wonder what our liability would be as a county if we only, 95% coverage is the average coverage, and we are at 82, and if we do something other than going to UHF or something such as that, it even reduces the coverage in the county.
Correct.
So I wonder what kind of liability the county has if we do not, or that if we just ignore the fact that our coverage is going to be reduced. Liability to citizens, I mean, to the Sheriff's Department, to Fire and Rescue, the school bus, the school buses, they have an incident. So my question is what kind of liability do we have there? And you can be pretty
Well-
brief too, just say you have none, or yes, we have liability.
Well, it's a difficult question to answer
Oh.
because obviously sovereign immunity and all of those liability issues come into it, but it's also, it sounds like, and without me having personal knowledge of the FCC mandate, it sounds like there are federal requirements at issue, and then other requirements that may be implicated. So I would not want to say without looking into it.
I think we need to look into that. I'm not sure there's any desire to go with something that's gives us less coverage than what we have now. I mean, western side of the county, as I was looking at the map, the western side of the county is not covered very well at all.
Correct.
And one district in the western side of the county represents almost 10,000 people out of 28,000. So I think we have to
Right.
keep that in the back of our minds. I'm through.
I'm a yes or no kind of guy too, so excuse me, but
I'll be quick.
You said the towers cost about $1 million a site, right?
The towers plus all the radio infrastructure equipment at that site, yes.
It was about $1 million.
Income, yeah, everything together is about $1 million a site.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Now the real question I want to ask you is, how late do I have to put out an RFP to meet the 2013 guideline?
You're pretty much at that end date now.
So if I put out
It's going to take roughly, the average system implementation is anywhere from 18 months to, if you really compress it, you may be able to get a system completely built within 12 months. You're at that point now. Included in that time, though, is the design phase, the RFP, the response, the negotiations.
we kind of multitask and kind of
Understood. So ideally, would be to get the RFP out on the street as quickly as possible, have a turnaround time in about approximately 2 months to 3 months, negotiate, have that all set up, and have a selection on what you want to do sometime in the fall. That would give you an award, be able to start implementing a system, and meet the date by 2013. That's more than yes and no, but I'm trying to...
No, that's good. That's good.
Okay.
But I am a yes or no guy
Right.
anyhow, but sometimes you need a little bit more.
Yeah.
All right, and what I'm trying to think of it, and you don't have anything to do with this,
Sure.
but Tuesday the board met with the school board,
Right.
and the school board gave us $20 million in projects they would like us to do this year, next year.
Right.
Now, you just asked us, you didn't ask us, but the people behind you are asking for $12 or $18 million for a radio system.
Right.
You know, $40 million is more than my budget for a year. I can't do everything.
Mm-hmm.
I got to pick between sheriff's cars, radio, repairing schools.
Yep.
I need to know, and usually my first thing is if somebody tells me what to do, what's the penalty?
Right.
Because if you tell me don't do something and you're not going to do anything, I don't care.
Right.
That's me personally, not me the supervisor, but,
Understood.
But if you tell me $10,000 a day, that might get my attention.
Mm.
But if I'm in the process, do I get a little more leeway? I'm in, January 2013 comes around and I've got 3 more towers to build, and you may not be able to answer the question, but I'm thinking that you're not going to charge me $10,000 a day if I'm trying.
You're right. I can't answer the question specifically.
Yeah.
You get to 2013 and you're in the process, will they fine you $10,000 a day? It depends on how far along you are in the process, and I cannot tell you how the FCC is going to handle it. They haven't identified a process on how they may look at extensions, but they have indicated that if you do nothing, they will fine you, and at some point they will shut your license down to give this
Right.
teeth. But to answer your question, if you get into this and we're delayed and the process starts in December and this bleeds over past January 1st, 2013, I can't answer the question definitively whether you will or will not get a fine.
Mr. Parton, have you or any of the folks on the radio committee considered that? What's going to happen, or have you contacted the FCC and said, we're at the 11th hour, we may not be able to do it? What happens if we're in the process?
We have not, Mr. Chairman. I mean, the best information we have is what Mr. Muniz just said, that, I mean, this thing's been around since the mid-90s, I believe, and all indications are that we have that they're serious about this. All we can do is speculate, and that's dangerous to do, of course, but if you're well underway with your system and you've shown that you selected an option and you're actually implementing it and you're well along into it, probably be fine if you slip a little bit, but You know, if you wait and not identify an option and move forward and show that you're not serious about it, they're not going to give you any leeway.
Okay. Would I ask you, or could I ask you to contact the FCC in writing and via phone if you need to, but definitely in writing so there's a paper trail. Tell them that where the county is in this process, we're just beginning the process, and cry on their shoulder a little bit. You know, we don't have X amount of funding. We don't have a lot of money. The county administrator is going to present his budget in a little while, and things are tight, like they are all over, which I can't imagine they would charge you $10,000 a day. But if you would do that, that may give us a little bit of understanding about what would happen. And then on the other side, if you would contact all the surrounding localities and make sure we know if there's a possibility to partner, because that could defray the cost a little. We know we're going to have to do something in the middle part of the county for sure, but the western side may be up near Spotsylvania, the other side near King and Queen, we may be able to do some sort of partnership.
Right.
We need to, before we spend $18 million or $12 million or $2 million, we need to make sure we exhaust every possible alternative there is. So if we can try that.
We've already done some preliminary work on that.
Great, and I knew you would, but just kind of formalize it and make sure we understand. And the last thing, I think that's good from you, Mr. Parton. The last thing for you, Mr. Muniz, is you have an RFP ready to go?
We are actually fairly ready to let it go. We've done most of the RFP development already.
Okay.
And what we're really waiting for is just approval to go ahead and release it, and then we'll release it to the county to review, make sure we're all in agreement that it captures everything it needs to, and we will release the RFP. A time frame on that can be a matter of a couple of weeks.
And we paid you for that already, right?
We're in the process of continuing.
Well, we're going to pay you, okay,
yeah,
okay.
But yeah, we're on contract for that, yes.
All right. Okay, so if I don't have to actually make this decision right now, today.
No.
I need to find out a little bit more about what Big Brother's going to do to me, and I need to find out a little bit more about what I can do with surrounding counties. Can we wait 30 days before we release the RFP?
What I would recommend is that you release the RFP, because some of that additional conversation with regard, as you said, doing multitasking at the same time, releasing the RFP doesn't lock you into doing anything.
Right.
And what it does is it's going to move you past budgetary pricing to actual pricing. So in essence, what you're doing is shortening that part of the cycle. While that is on the street, you can currently work and talk to your regional neighbors, and we've already been doing that, and that's already been taking place. You also look at some of the other opportunities, and you do see clarification from the FCC to see what they will allow. But releasing the RFP doesn't require you to do anything other than release it.
But if I release the RFP, I got to pick an option.
I think the RFP will be flexible, and again, we have the ability to reject any and all proposals. So really, you're not committing to anything by agreeing to release the RFP, and all you're doing is losing time.
Okay. All right, well, you're going to do the other things. I think I'm hearing the fact that the board wants to at least release the RFP, since that's for the most part a no-cost,
Right.
no obligation proposition.
Correct.
And then we can go from there. So, all right, thank you for your presentation.
Okay.
And we'll take a motion to proceed with the RFP.
So moved.
Chairman, well, that's fine. Second.
You were going to?
I was going to just say, let's release the RFP, and in less than, between now and the next 30 days, and then upon receipt of that, take a good solid review and have them come back with what they've received. We may not be able to do that in open session.
All right, well, we're going to do that anyhow, so
Okay.
I think that's good. Mr. Popowitz made the motion, you made the second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The motion carries unanimously. Let's do appointments before we take a quick break. Appointments, RAAA, Mr. Wick resigned. Does anybody have someone they were ready to appoint?
I have not appointed, I mean, I haven't looked into appointing somebody for that
Okay.
just yet. I found out about it on Sunday. He
Yeah, he sent us
a letter
and
on.
that's a countywide appointment, but I think you had the opportunity to appoint Mr. Wick because of the last person that was there. So if you want to look first and
Yes,
bring it back in March, that would be great.
yes.
And the Recreation Advisory Committee, I forgot whose appointment that was. Is that yours too, Mr. Popowitz, or Mr. Seeley's?
That is pool.
That is Mr. Popowitz, so you also have a...
I was not aware that that was mine. I was not aware that that the person moved until this evening, so I will look for somebody to take that slot as well.
Okay, great. We are obviously running a little bit behind. That is yours. Okay, so we'll do the appointments. We'll carry those over. Is there anything anybody wants to pull off the consent agenda?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to pull item D from the consent agenda. There are some things in that contract that I'm not real comfortable with, and I haven't had time to talk to Mr. Ashcraft or the attorneys about those things. And I'd like to push it to the next meeting, if we could, please.
Excellent. Anything else?
Mr. Chairman, C, F, H.
Well, all righty. Let's do this. We'll approve the consent agenda items A, approval of minutes, B, warrants, E is a resolution authorizing execution and delivery of continuing disclosure agreement in connection with the issues of Virginia Public School Authority of its school refinancing bonds. G is the insurance claim for George Spinner, and I is the renaming of relocated Route 652. Can we call it Carmel Church Loop versus Road? I thought that's what it was before. Okay. So I will be Carmel Church Loop instead of Carmel Church Road because it loops around the visitor center.
That's fine.
So is there a motion to approve those?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, motion made by Mr. Seeley, second by Mr. Popowitz. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. All right, we've got C, D. We're gonna move to. No, he pulled up. We approved A, B.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
can I just ask Mr. Shebel to comment on
On D.
the ramifications of moving that 30 days? I understand Mr. Popowitz's concerns, and if they're certainly of a large magnitude, but I just would like for the board to be aware of where we are in this process and how it may affect it, that's all. We
Okay.
certainly can still do that, but I'd like for him to be able to share that.
Mr. Shebel?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, currently the ramifications of not approving this tonight is every day that we delay this, we're seeing cost escalations. We can put our fingers right now on $30,000 additional costs that we've got to take out of our contingency to pay for copper price, all the electrical wiring. We also have an additional $20,000 in rebar pricing. We do expect, with the fuel prices going up, of concrete prices and other deliverable items to escalate its cost. And until we sign a contract, that's a never-ending dollar that we can't hold the contractor to. So it does eat away at our contingency every time that we delay moving forward with this. The board has already borrowed the money and it's sitting in the bank waiting for us to move forward. The county attorneys reviewed this thoroughly and agrees with what's in this, and we're glad to try to answer any questions that we have on that, if that's reasonable to bring back up. Or
I still want to do this 30 days, and I'll tell you why. There's some things in this contract that, just as you've alluded to, that concern me as far as change orders and some other things in here that I don't like, and I think that we need to get them changed in this contract before we sign it.
That's fair. Mr. Shebel, we're talking about $13 million, and I'd rather not make a $13 million mistake versus spending $30,000 more. I know both of those we shouldn't do, but I'd rather not make that bigger mistake.
that's correct.
So let us, if there's, Mr. Popowitz is willing to discuss it, we can discuss it. If you want more time, then we'll go with the 30 days, if that's your desire. We'll give you that opportunity.
Yeah, I think we need to go 30 days. There's several items in here that I want to discuss, and I think you'd get into a lengthy discussion tonight.
Mr. Shebel, we appreciate your efforts.
Thank you.
You understand? Okay. So we're gonna pass on D. Items C, F, and H were pulled. However, we're not gonna discuss those right now. If the board would indulge me, we will pick up the rest of the consent agenda after we do public hearings. And we're getting ready to take one. Give me 1 second. So we'll do the consent agenda after item 5. The board is going to take a 15-minute break. As all of the consent agenda items we missed. And I understand at 7:30 we had scheduled public comment, which is what we normally do at 7:30, and we obviously had some work to do before the meeting, so we've been running late since we started. So we're going to take a 15-minute break, and after the 15-minute break, we will go right to agenda item, well, the 7:30 public comments, and then we'll do the public hearing, and then we'll come back to the consent agenda. Mr. Parton, who is the gentleman over here, wave your hand. Wave your hand. Okay, Mr. Parton will have a sign-up sheet. So all of those folks that would like to speak for public comments, if you would please sign up with Mr. Parton so that we can have an orderly public comment section, because I can imagine there's probably a few people that would like to speak on the Reedy Church Supervisor. So if that's the case, please see Mr. Parton, sign up on the sign-up sheet, and we will take up that as soon as we come back. So we're going to take a 15-minute break. We'll stand adjourned. All right, we'll reconvene the February 10th meeting of the Caroline County Board of Supervisors. We have, as stated before, moved the consent agenda or the further discussion of the consent agenda until after we do our public hearing. At this point in time, Mr. Parton is where? Oh, he's gone, but we have a list of people who signed up to speak. Mr. Ashcraft is going to call the actual speaker, and he's going to call the next two speakers. So if the next two would come down to seats close to the front, we'll have at least a couple of people ready to go, so we could do this as efficiently as possible. Mr. Ashcraft, and I believe each speaker is going to be allowed a maximum of 3 minutes.
The first speaker this evening is Scott Moser, to be followed by Danny Carter and Michael Albright.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Scott Moser from Bowling Green District. Members of the board, I came up here tonight to tell you that I really appreciate the concern and attention to detail that you have given this radio project. As the chief stated, and Sheriff Flippa, this is the most important project that we have facing us today, and we certainly appreciate all the questions you've had and the points that you've made and the attention that you're giving this project that we feel like it deserves. Just wanted to thank you guys for what you're doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mosher.
Next speaker is Danny Carter, and I would ask the Reverend Charles Johnson to come forward after that.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I'm Danny Carter from the Madison District. The reason I come out tonight is that y'all are faced with a choice in the near future to select a member to join you on the board from the Reedy Church District. I just wanted to voice my support of Mr. Walter Young. I go back with Walter Young to the late 60s when he came to Ladysmith High School. I admired his character and his demeanor. At that time, I've continued to admire it over the years, and I just ask that y'all would select him as the new member of the Board of Supervisors from the Reedy Church District. I use the word class act for people that I admire, and Mr. Young is exactly that. He's a class act. He's a good friend, and I cannot say anything negative. I think he's a wonderful person. I think it would be a great asset to the county of Caroline. So I ask that y'all select him as y'all's new board member. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carter.
Next speaker is Michael Albright. I would ask Frank Redding to come down, please.
Hello, how are you? I'm Michael Albright. I'm here in support of Reggie Underwood. I have known Reggie Underwood for over 20 years and known him as a very good community leader. I have known him as a great basketball coach who took 3 different teams to the state Final Four, which shows his exceptional leadership ability. Not only were his teams successful on the court, but he also instilled discipline and a sense of purpose to the players. I have also known him as a school principal and administrator who reached out to the troubled kids, and I believe he made a very big difference in their lives. He knows the inner workings of the schools, and some things that may need fixing, which is an important part of the supervisor's job. As a long-term county resident, I believe his focus will be to improve and advance Caroline County. I think it'd be a very good choice. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Albright.
Next speaker is the Reverend Charles Johnson. I would ask Irene Fields to come down, please.
Good evening to everybody on to the board. My name is Reverend Charles Johnson. I'm standing here in support of Reverend Walter Young, whom I met in 1983 when I moved my entire family here from Maryland, and I found him to be a friend and a person that's concerned about the community in which he lived. I was not born here like he was, but I've been here for some time, and I think he's a nice friend, and I think he would be an accessible person to the Board of Supervisors. He's been in the school system for more than 34 years. He has served this county well on many of the county's committees. I trust that, and that all the persons that are in our area are looking for somebody to fill that seat that's in Reedy Church. And I ask the board to consider Reverend Walter Young for this position. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Reverend Johnson.
Next speaker is Frank Redding. I would ask Mac Thomas to come down, please.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, board members. Come this evening to speak on behalf of Mimi Tolliver as she seeks to be the replacement for Maxie Roselle for the Reedy Church District. I've worked with Mimi at our church in many endeavors, the adult education programs we have down there for GED and the youth education programs, as well as on the building committee. I can state unequivocally that Mimi is a person of the highest integrity, one of the hardest workers that I've ever had the opportunity to work with. Her dedication to the people of her district and the people of this county is second to none. She would make an excellent replacement for Maxie on the board. She would work diligently. She'd serve her constituents in her district, and I would just ask that you would strongly consider making her your choice. Good evening. Thank you.
Mr. Redding, before you go?
Yes.
And it's my fault. I neglected to make sure that when people speak, they state their name and their voting district. So could you tell us your voting district?
Bowling Green.
Bowling Green? Okay. Reverend Johnson, you're in Reedy Church? Mr. Albright? Where's Mr. Albright? Oh, duh. Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, and Mr. Carter's in Madison. So I think that's right. Mrs. Fields? Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman and the board, my name is Irene Fields. I'm from the Reedy Church District, and I came to speak in support of Ms. Tolliver. Of course, Frank stole my air. He said a lot of things I wanted to say because he and I both were in the GED program. We were teachers there. I've known Ms. Tolliver since she was like 12 or 13 years old and have admired the things that she has done in the community, especially getting together the GED program, for the people in the community, as you know, who had not finished high school or whatever, want to go on to college, and the other programs for the summer kids in the summertime, and so many other things she was engaged in, trying to get a grant from Philip Morris a few years ago. But at the time, we didn't know that Philip Morris didn't give grants for building for it. We wanted to repair the building at DPA, and she was at the forefront of that. And she's highly educated. Ms. Tolliver went on, when she finished high school, she went on to college and acquired 2 master's degrees. And I think that she'd be an excellent choice to replace Maxie Roselle. I wish you would consider her for the position.
Thank you, Mrs. Fields.
Next speaker is Mac Thomas. I would ask Cameron Wood to come forward, please.
Recognize the chair and other committees on the roster this evening. My name is Mac Thomas. I'm a Reedy Church District, the board there, and I'm not too good at remembering a lot of things, so I have a sketch for Mr. Young. I would like for you all to consider him this evening. I would like to read the sketch. Walter T. Young was born and reared in Caroline County, Virginia. He has spent the greatest portion of his life helping to train minds, build characters, and install positive values in the youth. His formal education was attained through the public school system, Caroline County, Virginia. Later, he received a Bachelor a master's degree from Virginia Union University and Virginia State University, respectively. His 34 years of work experience included being a teacher for 17 years and a principal for 17 years in Caroline County's school system, from which he retired in 1989. He has served in many capacities at the St. John Baptist Church in Milford, Virginia. They include Sunday school teacher, deacon, trustee, and treasurer for 27 years, a position from which he resigned to fulfill his ministerial representative responsibility. He has also served in many capacities within the community, namely a few included serving on the Caroline County School Board, Social Service Board, Tri-County Medical Board, Rappahannock Electoral Board, Rappahannock Community College Board, and the Selective Service Board. A born-again Christian who takes his spiritual seriously, he preached his initial sermon on July 13, 1996, St. John Baptist Church. Shortly thereafter, he enrolled in the Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology of Virginia State University, where he received a Master of Divinity degree in May 1999. He later served as the interim pastor of the Long Branch Baptist Church, Woodford, Virginia, for 15 months, and after which as an intern pastor of the Union Baptist Church in Beaver Dam, Virginia, for 20 months. He was married to the late Charlotte Wright Young. God blessed them with a daughter, Candace, son-in-law, Everett, and 4 darling grandchildren, Everett Jr., Seymour, and Sorrell. Board, I have known him for a long time. Matter of fact, all my life. I'm 74 years old, and I've been knowing him for this length of time. He's a great man. He loves to help people. He loves to see people strive. And I hope you will consider Mr. Walter Young to replace the people that needs to be done tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. And for the record, as far as my knowledge, we're not related in any way. So, who's next?
Next speaker is Cameron Wood, to be followed by Jeanette Parker.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, members of the board, Mr. Ashcroft. I'm Cameron Wood, and I reside at 26530 Oxford Road in the Reedy Church District of Caroline County. My family and I have a keen interest in Caroline County. We've been here for several generations. I have known Walter T. Young's family for over 50 years, and I have been Mr. Young's neighbor for well over 35 years. I will tell you that his character, his demeanor, his ethics, and his ability to deal with people, especially young people, are exemplary. It is difficult to find a person in this day and time, as you well know, a person who has the administrative capacity, the administrative abilities, the financial abilities, and the education and background to deal with the issues that you have to deal with as a supervisor of a growing county such as Caroline County. I came to Caroline as a school teacher in 1969. In those days, we had 6 classes a day and 31 students per class. And I can tell you I was lost. And every morning when I drove from Carmel Church up to Ladysmith Elementary School to assume my duties, I thanked the good Lord when I saw Walter Young's car there, because he was next door to me. And he guided me through those years until I gained enough experience to be able to deal with 6 times 31 all day long. But his 34 years as an educator, administrator, as a Christian person, as a family man, I think are the things that we need in a supervisor. And you know, because you're in that position, what type of person it takes and what type of background it takes to deal with the issues. And my family and I, as business people and landowners, timberland, farmers, and developers in Caroline County, would respectfully ask your consideration for Walter T. Young's appointment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Wood.
Next speaker is Jeanette Parker, to be followed by the Reverend Joanne Walker.
Good afternoon to the board. I'm Jeanette Parker, Reedy Church District, 25092 Oxford Road. I'm here to represent Mr. Young as chairman of the Board of Supervisors. And he is a very friendly person. He's a very educated person. And I recommend that you would take him